Hello, everybody, and welcome back for week number 2, the Sunday edition of the NFL Preseason Show. I'm going to be your host today, Sean, PSU fans to Newsham. We have a 2-game slate today. It is relatively small, so we'll run through each of the 4 teams, go over each positional situation, and discuss plays for the slate. As always, make sure you guys are following along in the Discord. News and notes will be dropped in there as the day progresses. And so much of the preseason is just sort of moving and making decisions based on what comes out news-wise. So make sure you guys are in there. We have games at 7 and 8 tonight, so the Discord will have any information after the recording of the show, which is around 11 a.m. Eastern. All right, we're going to start out with the first game of the night. We have the Cincinnati Bengals versus the New York Giants. Looking at Cincinnati and starting off with the quarterback position, we see from last week that Jake Browning, Drew Plitt, and Brandon Allen all played. However, Jake Browning absorbed a majority of the role. I think that Browning is definitely the best option of the 3 here, but it's hard for me to sort of give credit for Browning playing 71% of the snaps, again, with 3 guys playing. So I'm expecting all 3 guys to play, which therefore would mean that I think that they get a little bit more evenly distributed around this group. I still think Browning's an option. We don't have clear-cut quarterbacks today, so definitely still have to consider him, but he's not as good as what I think his snap count showed from week 1. Moving to the running backs. So Joe Mixon will not play here. Samaje Perine is likely to sit as well. That leaves Chris Evans, Travion Williams, and Jacques Patrick, who they did sign late and during camp. Last week, we saw Evans play 42%. He led the running backs. However, he was very, very ineffective. He had -3 yards rushing on 8 carries. I think we see him get more of a chance today to actually gain some yards and gain some traction before we head into the season. So I think he's my favorite running back in this game, possibly even on the slate. Williams, I think, is viable as well. We know he can catch the ball out of the backfield a little bit. We know he's active in the run game as well. Patrick definitely last week got the most carries of the group. However, it was very back-end stuff. I think we could see a little bit more Evans-Williams today, possibly at the detriment of Patrick. However, if Patrick gets that fourth quarter run where they're just running slams up the middle every play, Patrick is an option as well. So those 3 running backs, I think, are all in play. Knowing that we likely only have 3 here to begin with, that's a good start in terms of the position. Moving to the receivers. So as we see here, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd will not play. Mike Thomas in week 1 played 0 snaps despite being active. If you remove those 4 and think that they do not play again, which all indications are that will be the case, you're down to 7 guys. All 7 of these guys played a decent amount outside of Stanley Morgan. Everyone was over 30%. The best of this group was sort of the lower end. You see that Jack Sorensen, Lassiter, Javon Heli, and Kendrick Pryor all played 40+% of the snaps, or 39 in Heli's case. But all of these guys are good, solid GPP dart throws. We're going to talk about other receiving positions or other receiving cores as we go here, and you'll see why I like others slightly more. However, I think it's totally realistic to enter any of these guys into a GPP lineup and expect that you can get 30 to 40% of snaps, probably a couple targets out of them. Moving to the tight end position, the only guy that's of interest to me here is Thaddeus Moss. Moss had 4 targets last week, and he is Randy Moss's son. We've seen him produce in the collegiate game as well. He's the only guy that's really a receiving threat out of this group. But you see, we do have quite a few tight ends that are going to play. I will say Scotty Washington was a receiver at Wake Forest, and he is going to get, let's say, 10 to 15% of the snaps here. All of his snaps are likely going to have him running routes because he's not a big guy. He's not going to sit there and be blocking. So if you want a really deep GPP throw on a tight end, Scotty Washington could be your guy. All right, moving over to the New York Giants here. Starting off at the quarterback position, we think Daniel Jones is going to play, similar to week 1, but it could be limited. There's a lot of offensive line issues right now with the Giants. That could be a hesitation spot for them with Daniel Jones. That leaves Tyrod Taylor and Davis Webb. As you see here, they split snaps evenly in week 1 after Daniel Jones left. With that in mind, Webb's not much of an option to me. He lacks the mobility, whereas Taylor does have the mobility, but it's a little bit of a situation where is Tyrod Taylor really going to go out there and run a lot during the preseason? It's probably unlikely. So none of these quarterbacks really stand out to me. Nothing really is interesting there. If you want to throw a few percentage points on them in GPPs, that seems fine. But cash games, there's just going to be other options, and GPP, there are probably better options as well. Moving to the running backs, as you see, we had 5 guys play in week 1, including Saquon Barkley. You had Barkley, Brightwell, Antonio Williams, and Jashaun Corbin all get a decent amount of snaps. Platzgummer barely played, so I really wouldn't look at Platzgummer here. I think he's played one series, like literally right at the end of the game. He did almost score in the series, but I just would probably stay away from him. The guy that really stands out here is Jashaun Corbin. Corbin's a really good pass catching back. He actually had 6 targets, I believe, in week 1 of the preseason, which is a pretty fantastic output for running backs. Now, that said, I think we're going to see 5 running backs again today as of now, and that is not a very thin backfield comparatively to some of these other spots where we are going to have 3. So I think GPP-wise, they are options, but nothing really is great there. Similar situation when you go to the receiving core. So we know Kadarius Toney won't play. We know Sterling Shepard is not going to play, and Darius Slayton. We saw a big distribution between the receivers in week 1 in terms of snap counts. I will say, watching the play-by-play in week 1, Colin Johnson seemed like there was 5 of him. He was basically targeted on every play and seemed to be producing massively. I think he had 8 targets in week 1. So he's definitely my favorite receiving option here for the Giants. But if you look at like Richie James, you look at Keelan Doss, you look at Marcus Kemp, these guys all played 30% of the snaps. They're going to all be relatively under-owned, especially that of like Marcus Kemp and Richie James. I think they'll go a bit under-owned. People were heavily on Wan'Dale in week 1. I don't think they will be as much here. And if he plays the similar 15% of snaps as he did in week 1, it likely is not a great spot to attack. Moving to the tight ends, I don't think there's anything here. None of these guys are great pass catchers that are going to be playing. Bellinger played 50% of the snaps in week 1. However, he only had 1 target. So tight end wise, we actually do have tight ends tonight that I think are decent plays compared to what we have other slates. So I'm not really looking at Bellinger. I'm going to go elsewhere at the tight end position. All right, last game of the night, we got the Ravens against the Arizona Cardinals. So starting off with the Baltimore Ravens, something for you guys to note, Baltimore has not lost a preseason game since 2015. They come out and they want to play it. They want to win these games. So I typically will give a bit of benefit to the Ravens in that situation. So looking at quarterbacks, they released Brett Hundley this week. In my opinion, that is a really good sign for Anthony Brown because Tyler Huntley, they know he's going to be the backup. Like Tyler Huntley will be the backup. Anthony Brown is not very good. But he's very mobile. So Anthony Brown has a chance to produce if he gets an extended run here, which I think is a possibility. If they keep it split down the middle, I think Huntley's a great play as well. I will probably have some of each of them in GPPs. Looking at the running backs, as you guys see, this running back situation is very deep. We do think that there's a possibility here that they might give some more back end run to guys like Mason and Beatty again. But you see here, we have Mike Davis, Justice Hill, McCrary, Beatty, and Ben Mason. We're looking at 5 running backs in this situation. It's very deep. It was very spread out in week 1. It'll probably be pretty spread out again in week 2. I think you're limited to these guys on GPP only, but there are guys here that can produce. We think that there's a possibility that they give really a lot of back-end run to a guy like Ben Mason. If they give a lot of run to Ben Mason, maybe that could be someone that's a GPP dart that really pays off for you. All right, looking at the receivers, I do like the receiving situation. As you start looking here at the top, we have Bateman, Prochet, Duvernay, Tylan Wallace, all banged up, probably will not play. Demarcus Robinson is a big question mark. They just signed him this week, but we do know Demarcus Robinson has talent to produce in the NFL, not even just the preseason. So that's someone that could be productive. Bailey Gaither did return this week in practice. Slade Bolden did not play in week 1, but there is a possibility he plays. But looking through this depth chart, you see Mekhi Polk played 64% of snaps in week 1, and he was targeted frequently in that game. Shermar Bridges played 42%. He was able to come down with a touchdown. Benjamin Victor at 33%. He's a very tall receiver. He's about 6'5", 6'6". So Benjamin Victor could definitely be a red zone threat as well. So there's some receivers here that are solid. I think you could definitely play some of these guys and consider them as solid plays in the game as well. Tight end position, this is where I want to talk about tight ends that I really like. In week 1, we saw Josh Oliver play 52% of snaps and Isaiah Likely play 37%. They had 6 catches between the two of them. In this offense, we know they use the tight end. There is only going to be possibly 3 tight ends that will play in this game. And those two are very, very solid pass catching options at tight end. So I think those two are the two best tight end plays on the slate, which might cause me to have to give up my preseason credentials, which we'll talk about here in the next game. But really love Likely, really like Josh Oliver. These two guys are going to be active. They're both very strong plays, which for a tight end, we don't get to say that often during the preseason. All right, moving over to the Arizona Cardinals, starting off at quarterback. We get a situation where Kyler Murray and Colt McCoy are not expected to play. That leads to Trace McSorley and Jarrett Guarantano. So we saw last week Trace McSorley was very solid in his game. He has mobility to go out there and get some rushing yards. He likely is going to play possibly into the third quarter, if not more, because we're not expecting Jarrett Guarantano to have much of an impact on this team. So Trace McSorley is the guy they want to get snaps in this game. That said, on Guarantano, he is very bad. He is a guy that you want your defense to be targeting in situations. So definitely consider that when looking at defense. But I think for me, McSorley is my favorite quarterback on the slate. He has the mobility and possibly the longest runway and largest range that could be positive out of all the quarterbacks. That said, none of the quarterbacks today are super slam dunks where we think they could play a whole game. We're probably looking at 2 to 3 quarterbacks on a couple of these guys, and a lot of guys are going to play a half. Moving to the running backs, we do not expect James Conner to play. Darrell Williams did not play in week 1. That probably will remain the same here. And looking at the running backs, I would not really touch TJ Pledger. With only 7% of snaps in week 1, it's pretty clear they don't see much in him in terms of making the team or really wanting to see anything out of him. We saw a solid percentage between Eno Benjamin, Keontae Ingram, and Jonathan Ward, and I don't see why there would be much difference here this week. My favorite running back situation is the Bengals, but I definitely think that Eno Benjamin, Ingram, and Ward are solid options in GPP. We saw Ward had 2 touchdowns, I believe, in week 1 of the preseason, which if you're getting 2 touchdowns out of a player, that is pretty fantastic in a preseason game. Moving to the quarterbacks, we see the top 5 guys are out. We also see Basilea is doubtful with a knee injury. That does not leave very many options here at receiver. And what we see is Andy Isabella with a monstrous 83% of snaps in week 1. He had 7 targets on those 83 snaps, very productive. Greg Dortch had 56% of snaps. He also had 7 targets as well. In terms of receiver, these are probably my 2 favorite receivers of the slate. They're both just very solid options that should play a significant amount of the time. We also saw with Aitman that he played a significant amount before it tailed off a bit with Bolden, Kirkland, and Payton. This is the thinnest receiving crew that we see. I think that Andy Isabella and Greg Dortch are going to get extended run again here in week 2 and are probably the 2 best receivers by a decent margin, but they're going to also be owned like that. So if you are looking for maybe a little bit reduction of ownership, Marcel Aitman might be your guy. Looking at the tight end situation, so this is a spot where it's very interesting to me. So Trey McBride, for those unfamiliar, is a rookie out of Colorado State. He caught 90 passes last year in his last year at Colorado State. That is a significant amount for any tight end in college football. And this is a guy that is very active in the pass game. He did not play in week 1, but is expected to make his debut here in week 2. So if he plays, which all indications are that he is likely to do so, McBride is a fantastic GPP tournament option at tight end. So I definitely think considering McBride to some extent is a good option. Looking at the defenses quickly, I definitely think that we have 2 spots, both in this game, that are a bit more weak. Guarantano is a very weak option. Anthony Brown is a very weak option at quarterback. Also, looking at the first game, the Bengals quarterback play as a whole is just not very strong overall. The Giants, if they're going to play Tyrod Taylor and Daniel Jones, that to me is definitely the best quarterbacks of the slate. I think that defense, and because of that, with the Bengals defense, is the worst defensive option. But having all the defenses involved to some extent is important. So a quick rundown of the positions. I definitely think that McSorley is my favorite quarterback as of now for this slate. I think Anthony Brown is a solid GPP option. I think there are other GPP options as well. Looking at the backfields, I think the Bengals backfield has the clearest path to touches out of the group. So I definitely like the Bengals backfield more than the rest of them. We don't really have any clear-cut situations where people are going to get volume. So you definitely have to take that into consideration when looking at the running backs for the slate. Receivers, again, we saw a lot of guys with 40% of snaps in week 1 that are in these teams. You have a lot of good options. I definitely think the best two on the slate are Isabella and Dortch. However, their quarterback play is not the best, and they're going to be owned like they are the best players on the slate. So just something to keep in mind. Tight ends, for the first time in a long time, we have good tight ends on the slate. I think Isaiah Likely, Oliver are great options. I think Trey McBride is a great GPP play if he runs out there as well. All right, everyone, that's going to wrap it up for us here today. Good luck on this slate. I'll be back with you guys tomorrow for another quick showdown run through on the Monday night game. Good luck to everyone. We will see you guys later.